All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Elisheva Yisrael from the Kingdom of Caid, and I'm talking today about making Murri and the various fermentation experiments and experimentation that I've been doing with trying to make Murri over the last 3 years recently, actually. So first, what is Murri? It is a fermented barley sauce that was found pretty much all over the Arab-speaking world within period. And I have kind of our nice world map here just to orient ourselves. So the green Umayyad Caliphate is the breadth of region that we're looking at, in which we find which we find references to this Murri sauce. So there's several different references, either referencing the sauce itself or actually giving recipes in addition to simply referencing the existence of this. So Ibn Sayyar al-Warraq's book in the 10th century of Baghdad has recipes for making this thaj, kind of molded barley bread cake thing as the prerequisite to making Murri, and then also references the sauce itself. The 13th century Anonymous Andalusian book has references to Murri as well. And then there's kind of recipe versions in the Kitab Wasf there's a Byzantine Murri version in there, as well as a Murri Naki, like an Iraqi Murri. And al-Baghdadi Kitab al-Tabiq book also has a Murri recipe. And then the 14th century Khan's book from Egypt also has several Murri recipes. So lots of stuff referencing this.
Excuse me 1 minute. Do you have the Fidalat al-Khiwan, which was recently published?
I don't.
It has 13 recipes for Murri.
So exciting. Yeah, so I need to get my hands on
Save your pennies and get that one. It has fish Murri too.
Oh, very exciting. Yeah, actually that is in line with the next slide. So thank you so much for setting that up for me, because I was thinking this as a fermented sauce, there are multiple fermented sauces found all around the world that are very similar, but several of them, like the Mesopotamian siku sauce as well as the Roman garum sauce, are fish based. And then we have soy sauce, which we're very familiar with modernly, that is not fish based, but is made from another grain, usually wheat. And then there's various other fish sauces as well found in other cultures that are fermented fish based, but we've still got more grain stuff. So I think Murri is still well represented as being a grain based fermented sauce. So how to make it, the general procedure, looking at most of these recipes, they are starting with some kind of a rotted or molded barley cake. Some recipes also include a rotted bread in addition to the molded barley cake. So you can do something where you get sliced bread and wet it a little bit and let it grow green mold, and have that in addition to the barley cake. But the barley starter is pretty standard for all of these recipes. And then it's ground up into a flour. You add spices. Actually, it turns out you don't have to add spices. Not all of the recipes use spices. So the Khan's recipes from Egypt, there are several that are unflavored, but a lot of the other ones that I had found thus far added significant spices and flavoring agents, as well as water. You set it in the sun for over 40 days. And then drain it to get the first extraction. And then you can add water, add more bread or flour, and repeat the sunning step and leaving it in the sun for another 40 days or 40 plus days, depending, and you can get a second extraction. You can get a third as well from some of the references, although I think the assumption is that as you're doing more extractions as you go, it's going to be weaker and weaker. So something like a third or fourth extraction, it's not as recommended, because it's not going to be as strong. I've only done 2 extractions from my experiments. I have not tried to do a third. So maybe this next year I'll try to do 3 and let you know how much weaker it gets when you do the third. So what are all the experiments that I've tried to do? So this is very much this is all the things that I have tried including all the things that went wrong, so that if you try to do this, you don't have to repeat my mistakes. So just to kind of key that up, that's the perspective that we're taking on this. So in 2019, I tried to make a reduction of the thaj, like rotted barley bread, based on the description in Ibn al-Warraq. And I'm going to hopefully, like, switching over, at least personally, so that I can read the description isn't going to completely destroy the screen share for you. But the description in this recipe is making thaj, which is come. Take as much as needed of wheat flour or wheat and barley flour in equal amounts. Knead the flour into a very dry and stiff dough by adding a little water. Do not use yeast, but add a lot of salt to prevent the dough from breeding worms. Shape the dough into small thick discs, which you wrap with fig leaves or cover with their own sifted bran. Bury them in ash or hay for 40 days and take them out. The good ones should be rotted and reddish in hue. Let them dry out completely and use as needed. So on the left, you have a sample of the cake, and it was wrapped in fig leaves. I happened to have a fig tree on my property at the time, and I got a few of the leaves out and wrapped it together, put twine to stick it all together. I had plenty of ash from the barbecue, so I just buried it in a flower pot, really, of ash, and left it in there for 40 days. And when I took it out, I got the thing that we see on the right, which is still wet and still very fresh. There's a tiny bit of grayish hue around the outside, but this is not red, it is not molded, and it's like practically perfectly preserved. And I later found out from like reading other recipes in cons that burying food in ash was actually used as a preservative method. So I'm not really sure where the notion of burying in ash was supposed to like actually make the molding happen. I think maybe the burying in hay is probably a better approach there, because you're going to get more air, whereas the ash, there's such fine particles, or maybe it was a different kind of ash that they were using. But the stuff that I had was such fine particles that you had very little airflow, and so you're just not going to get the same like proliferation of these molds and bacteria to be able to get the molded barley bread effect. So this was kind of a bust, at least for the effect that I was looking for. So the next year I tried again, and I tried a different method of making the thaj. And this was from the Kitab al-Wasf, and the description there is to knead barley unleavened and without salt exceedingly well and make it into loaves, each one half an Egyptian pound. Then wrap them in male fig leaves and insert fig tree twigs into them as far as the leaves will permit. Spread them on barley bran and arrange them side by side in a house in which sunlight does not enter or not much. Then leave it 20 days, turn it over top to bottom and leave it another 20 days. Then you gather them with their rot and leaves and pile them up and leave them 20 days. Then you break off a piece of it, and if you find red veins inside, it is quite ripe. If not, leave it another 20 days, then take it out in any case and clean off the decay with a knife. So at this point in time, I did not have enough fig leaves to like do the same wrapping, and also I was making multiple cakes. In my naivete, I thought, well, it just needs to be kind of covered with something like maybe vaguely papery that is not going to be super, close. So I just used waxed paper as something that I thought would, maybe be somewhat equivalent. I put it on some, raw barley to kind of lift it off the tray a little bit and encourage airflow. And I stuck it on a tray and put it in my closet. Is the image that you see on the right, and left it for 20 days. Turned them over, left it another 20 days, and like checked on them. And they had, in fact, dried out. They were hard as concrete, very, very hard. And there was a little bit of reddishness. I was very excited. So it's a little bit hard to tell, but like on the lower left-hand sample, there's this like pink spot. So in addition to kind of the white mold that we're seeing, there was some like pinkish reddish stuff in there. So I said, well, I'm going to count this a success and see what happens if I continue using this. And then became the like arduous process of then breaking these up, because as I said, they were very hard. And I learned that you do not put these immediately as is in large chunks into a food processor to try and break them up, because you will break your food processor. So I needed to like first cut into pieces with a knife on a cutting board, and then spent a really long time with a mortar and pestle to pound these and get them into smaller pebble size. And then once they were smaller, then I was able to like food process them a little bit to get it more towards the like floury texture of, you know, having something ground up. And then put it in a jar with a number of spices. And let's see, do I have my list of spices? It was using 1/5 of its weight in table salt, and as much dry thyme as salt, as much milled dry coriander as thyme, and as much of the coriander of these spices: caraway, nigella, fenugreek, anise, fennel. And each of these measure 1/5, and let the fennel be a little bit more. So I did that, put all of those spices together in the jar, and then added water, covered the jar with some cheesecloth, and set it on the roof of my trellis for the backyard. So this is the trellis that was, it was just over our back patio, because the recipe instructions would say to put this on the roof. I had a very pitched roof in this house. We've since moved, but in this house it's very pitched, so I'm not going to put it directly on the roof, but the trellis seemed like a very good option. And I left it there for 40 days in the hot sun in the middle of the Los Angeles summer 2020. Now, one of the things that ended up happening, because I failed to reread the recipe super carefully and realize that you're supposed to be checking it quite often, adding more water as necessary and stirring it up on a regular basis. I did not do that. And so it did dry out a little bit. So a lot of the spices kind of rose to the top, and then it kind of like dried out a little bit, got a little bit of crustiness on the top, which you can kind of see there that the top bit is more dried. But it actually still, like after 40 days, it smelled amazing. It smelled really like all of the spices, especially the fennel, were very fragrant, and it smelled quite yeasty. So I took that as another really good sign that this was doing what it was supposed to do. So I ended up adding a little bit more water so that it was pourable. And this is the next step, is again in my naivete and my like misremembering of the recipe and the instructions, because there's instructions talking about adding like half-baked fresh yeasted bread to the mixture and then re-putting it in the sun to ferment again. And it also talks about like a filtering process. And I stupidly kind of merged these into my brain and was thinking of like, oh, that's kind of interesting. They like filtered it through bread, like through fresh baked bread. Well, okay, like I will try that. And so that's what I was doing here. So don't do this, because this was just an invention of my silly brain, but like it didn't hurt anything. And this was the first redaction, or the first extraction that I got out of this. It was a very interesting substance. So it does have a bit of a raw flour taste, because the barley that was originally used in that cake was not cooked or anything first. Like it was raw barley ground into flour and then made into these like molded cakes, and then and then fermented in the sun. So there's a little bit of a kind of raw flavor, and the depth of flavor from this particular version was not super deep. So like I had read, Charles Perry was the one who said that Murri, like when you make it at home, that it tastes kind of like soy sauce. And so if you're just making recipes that are calling for Murri, you could probably substitute soy sauce without much fuss, and it won't change the like overall flavor of the recipe very much. When I made this myself, I realized this is not the case. This does not taste anything like soy sauce, because soy sauce has a much deeper and richer flavor. This tasted to my palate a lot more like Bragg's. So it's a much thinner kind of a flavor. so I was thinking, well, this is interesting. Maybe I will need to substitute with Bragg's for future recipes if I don't happen to have, Murri on hand. So yes, this is just another, I did a second extraction. When I did the second extraction, oh, whoops. Let's just start video. I'm going to see if I can go through that. Okay. So the next point that I wanted to make about that raw flourness element from this redaction is that I realized if you do it in this way and the flour is not cooked first, when you then use the sauce later to make another sauce. So for example, there's several dishes where you mix almost equal parts Murri and vinegar, or you mix Murri and vinegar and oil and cook this up again some more. It thickens really significantly because you're essentially making a roux. And then I was blown away and very excited because it meant that some of the other recipes made a lot more sense. So there's this particular one that's on the slide is a chicken dish. So it's kind of reminiscent of a dish gimli from the Anonymous Andalusian. But I've also made, there's an asparagus recipe from al-Warraq that's very fun because it comes with a very not safe for work poem about asparagus, but the sauce that goes with that particular recipe is basically Murri and a little bit of oil and vinegar. And when I did it the first time, and I tried using a soy sauce as kind of a faux Murri, and I needed to thicken the sauce significantly by adding a starch in order for it to have a sauce-like texture. But with this stuff, with this Murri, you don't need to add anything because it's already got that flour in it. And so if you are then cooking it into a sauce, it thickens up and makes its own thick sauce immediately. So that was really neat to experience and see.
Excuse me just one second. When you say Bragg's, I'm assuming you mean Bragg's Aminos?
Yes.
Because they make multiple different products.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I've only had it as health food nut substitution for soy sauce.
That's what it all is, but they're all different. They also make a cider vinegar and a few other things.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, it's the aminos. Thank you.
You have a question and a couple of comments in chat. The question is, so not much umami flavor?
There is some umami flavor. It's just not as, I would say it's not as rich an umami flavor as you would expect from other descriptions and from something like soy sauce. With this method anyway. The fennel was very strong on this one. The spices in this were very strong. So continuing, in 2021, I was thinking about this and thinking about how I really wanted a richer flavor, that I was kind of disappointed that it didn't have as deep a flavor as I had expected. And I was thinking about, how do other people make fermented sauces? Do you make it from raw grains and raw barley? And realized that it's soy. When you make soy sauce, for example, you cook the beans and you cook the wheat first. So I thought, well, let me experiment and see what that would be like. So I again tried to make a cooked barley boudage and with wild molds. So that same initial procedure that I was trying to do. And this time I just had brown paper. So I made the paste to make these little cakes, wrapped them in brown paper, and I stuck them. This time I had it outside because I have an allergy to mold, and so having it in my bedroom closet from the previous year ended up not being really great for my breathing. And so I was like, all right, I'm not going to have it inside the house to mold inside the house. Instead, I will put it outside. And we had moved during pandemic. So I'm now in a different house, so a slightly different region of Southern California. And I put it outside under, so it was still covered and shaded. It was under our outdoor barbecue, which was unused at the time. and I let it mold for, for 20 days, flipped it, left it for another 20 days. And when I pulled it out, the result that we see here on the right is what happened. So first, the paper had like fused very closely with the barley, and it grew all sorts of mold. So it was not just a little bit of the white mold plus the like reddish pinkish mold, but we also had green, we had blue, we had orange and black. So I got a variety pack this time. And I did, in fact, try to like soldier on a little bit and put it into a very large jar with water and some spices. But it smelled awful and disgusting and like not edible. And I ended up tossing the whole thing because this did not look safe in any way. So this was a big old fail for this particular experiment. I would caution you greatly when trying to do your own wild molds, and to be really, really careful. I don't know if part of it was that it was outside, and so it was like really way more exposed to a lot more variety of different molds and bacteria like floating in the air. It's possible that using the like brown paper, also, again, you're like really supposed to use fig leaves, and I didn't have fig leaves, so I was trying to do different substitutes. So I would recommend not doing something like a paper because it fused too much, and maybe had something to do with like adding all of these extra molds to the mix. So yeah, there's my like cautionary tale there. And if you see this many like bright colors on your cakes, probably don't try and turn this into something that you're going to consume. The next thing, but at the same time, I tried a different experiment that same year, again, inspired by soy sauce, as I had found a lovely like couple of blogs that outlined how to make soy sauce from home. And so it's like, you know what, let me just try and see what this is like, to do a similar kind of a procedure. And it turns out you can buy commercial aspergillus mold. So that you are very certain of what mold you are going to be growing on your cakes. So I got some. This is just the aspergillus mold that is designed for soy sauce, and I just put this and mixed this together with the cooked barley and made little furrows in the barley, which is from the traditional soy sauce method, to kind of increase air for getting into these different parts, and left this. This only took like 2 days to start to mold, and I had this one in like just in the oven. So I'd stuck it in the oven so that it was kind of sealed off and like not just floating in the air in the house. And it was a much shorter period of time. And before all of this, I failed to get a picture of this one, but all of this was covered with a layer of light white fuzz. So it was that white fuzzy mold that was all over this everywhere. And I took that and stuck it into a jar with water, with spices. The spice mix, this time I used the Kitab al-Tabiq's recipe, using a third proportion of salt to the boudage, the kind of boudage-esque cooked barley and aspergillus mold mixture. And I used fennel, anise, and fenugreek, get spring water, and I like got a little creative on this one and added some like dried lemon and celery seeds, in large part because I had just moved and my spice collection was severely depleted and I hadn't like replenished yet. At the same time, I was also trying to make some rose oil, so that's what's on the left here. But put it all together, again covered with cheesecloth, stuck it in the sun outside for 40 days. This time I did remember to check in on it to make sure that it wasn't like drying out. Interestingly enough, I kept checking on it throughout those 40 days. And it was like, it didn't really need extra water until the very, very end. Like it was still wet. I would like stir it up a little bit. It still had plenty of water, stir it up a little bit. And it wasn't until the very end. Oh, sorry, my headphones have evidently stopped working, so I'm just using the laptop speaker stuff. So hopefully you all can still hear me. Oops. But
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, so it smelled like it didn't start smelling really of anything until like towards the end of those 40 days. And towards the end of those 40 days was also when it started to dry out a little bit. Until then, it just looked like this. It was pretty neat to just say, like, to see how it really did change over time, and that like fermentation and yeasting kind of process, I think, like, it didn't really kick in to start dramatically changing the substance until the end of those 40 days. So you really do need like at least 40 days and probably a little bit more. And then when I finished it, I took it out and drained it and got the first extraction. This one, you can tell the color is way darker. And it does, in fact, have a much deeper umami flavor. So this one really does taste a lot more like soy sauce, like a spiced soy sauce. Obviously, it's not exactly the same because it's from barley, and the collection of spices and aromatics that you use is different. But this was like a much deeper flavor, and like completely fascinating at the change in these two different versions. And you could absolutely get like a second extraction. It was basically as good as the first. I did not notice much of a difference between them, using this like really intense, intensely darkened stuff that you're fermenting in with the barley here. So really neat stuff. This one, because it was pre-cooked, you don't get that same effect of when you're cooking with it and turning it into a sauce later. It's not going to thicken up in the same way that the uncooked one will. So this one, it like performs and behaves a lot more like something like a soy sauce later. So I thought it was fun. It was interesting. It's not shocking that it behaves a lot like soy sauce, since I basically followed a soy sauce like method to create that boudage in the beginning. But also I think really informative about how much like cooking the grains in advance is affecting how it then behaves in the sun, and how much of a deeper umami flavor it's getting. Is that plus the aspergillus mold, which I will probably continue using the commercial aspergillus, just because it seems way safer to use something where I'm sure of what mold I am introducing to the substance, instead of kind of relying on wild molds that happen to be around the property, because you've also got molds in different regions are different. And I don't feel as secure that the molds that I have in Southern California are the same as the molds that I would find in Baghdad, or in Egypt, or in Spain. And so, yeah, like it may be possible, but I think I will just feel a lot safer serving this to folks if I continue to use the commercial one. So yeah, and here's another photo of the extraction. It's a really nice liquid sauce. Interestingly, later, one of the things that I also found in the Khan's book are several versions of unfermented Murri. And actually there's the Byzantine Murri that is referenced on David Friedman's website. He's got like a copy of Charles Perry's translation from, I think, Kitab al-Wasf. That's that was also an unfermented Murri. So I call it a faux Murri, because you're putting it together by toasting bread very, very dark, and then the Byzantine one, toasting bread very, very dark, and then mixing it with spices and honey and water and salt, and cooking it all together and creating a sauce.
So he has that as an appendix to the translation of the Anonymous Andalusian cookbook. Yes. And some of the recipes in the Anonymous Andalusian say, do not use that kind of Murri.
Right. There's like, no, you're supposed to use the real Murri, not this like Byzantine stuff. Yeah. It's interesting. Like, it's fascinating to kind of think of, all right, there's these wildly different versions. Some are going to be fermented, some are unfermented, probably because people didn't want to go through the trouble of fermenting Murri, but you get different results, right? Like it's going to be vastly different. And then before I started making my own and experimenting with making my own, I was kind of like, well, if some people say that this tastes like soy sauce, maybe it can kind of just spice up soy sauce, and that's like a faux Murri. So it's a very fake Murri substitute, which is probably fine if you're doing like a feast and you need to do like a cheap option, but it really doesn't taste the same. So really, at least more interesting to kind of go through the process of making your own. But if you have folks who are really, again, nervous about the molds that you're trying to use, even if you're using a commercial starter, then an unfermented Murri may be a good option for you. So I just to kind of continue on this path and like experiment with what are the different options, I did try an unfermented Murri from the Caid's book. So this is taking 2 parts barley flour and 1 part salt, crush the salt, combine it with flour, knead it together, and make these little flatbread dough. Let the bread bake overnight in like a low heat of the oven, because the idea is that the oven is not being used anymore, but it's been hot from being used all day. So this is probably either a central bakery or the oven that you had been using like constantly all day long. So it's going to be still hot, but you're not actively stoking the fire. You're just letting it bake in the remaining heat. Take them out the following morning, so they should be burnt inside and out. Otherwise, return them to a hot oven and keep them there until they burn. So I did like try and put this together. Initially, I tried to do the thing where I like heated up the oven to, I think, like 400 or something, and then turned it off and stuck them in the oven and left them there overnight. They didn't really, like, they kind of baked through, they dried out, but they didn't like burn. So I ended up turning the oven back on to get this nice dark color of what you see here, and then ground it up into a flour. This one was much kinder on the food processor. It did not get that same kind of concrete texture, so I didn't need to worry about breaking my food processor. And I mixed it up with several of the like recommended herbs and spices. This one, there's several versions of this unfermented one in the Caid's. One of them has mint. The one that I used here had also basil as well as rue and thyme. And then filled it with water, and again left it in the oven overnight, like after having turned off the oven from being up to temp. When I did this and I left like this liquid in the oven to kind of cook a little bit like that, it actually overboiled and made a giant mess in my oven, so I don't recommend that. But you do want to like cook it a little bit, so like cook it on a low heat, but just keep an eye on it so it doesn't overboil and make a giant mess. And then you extract it out, and you've got another liquid, this brown liquid at the bottom, that honestly is very similar to the other Murri, the cooked Murri that I had made. So it's not exactly the same, like it's a little bit lighter. It's not the same umami flavor. You have a little bit more of that kind of charcoaliness from having essentially burnt your bread. But it's not a terrible substitute if that's the sub that you've got. So most of this, other than the unfermented Murri stuff I had done after I had written this up as a blog post, but the rest of these wild experiments from 2019 and 2020 and 2021 are all documented on my WordPress blog, which is Brass Lamp, so brasslampblog.wordpress.com. So I put my kind of Murri redaction stuff in there. And then I have a number of mundane references available. So the different sources from, Anonymous Andalusian on David Friedman's website, the notes that I found on making soy sauce, and the Murri Naki and Ibn al-Warraq from Neral Nasrallah, as well as the Caid's book. Let's see. Oh, one more thing actually that I don't think I have listed here, but when I had gone back to I looked at how some other folks had been doing Murri redactions, and like going back to how they were doing these boudage things, and discussion of why you want to use fig leaves as opposed to some kind of a substitute like I did with wax paper or with brown paper. And it turns out that fig leaves, which are consistently labeled. Like most of these references talk about using fig leaves specifically. And then there was, this one from Kitab al-Wasid, use the fig leaves and then pierce the fig leaves with fig twigs so that it's going all the way through the cakes. And I, again, naively thought that this was just because you want to have some like air circulation because you want the molds to be getting to it. No, it turns out the molds that you want specifically, like they grow on fig leaves. And so figs are going to have that mold that is desired. And that's why you wrap it in fig, is because then you're more likely to get the desired mold that you want. So that's probably going to be one of my next experiments this year, in addition to just doing another version with the commercial aspergillus mold. But I need to find someone local who has a fig tree, because I don't have one anymore, because I moved. So new property, no fig. But I need a number of fig leaves so that I can try wrapping them and piercing them and see if we can get as much of the right kind of mold from growing on figs into these barley cakes, and see how that works, and if that works any better. So, but yeah, overall, those are my experiments with Murri so far. And I will take a break and check the chat, because I think there was some interesting commentary on the like chemistry of barley and things.
Yeah, I'm the chemistry of barley person. We used to extract beta glucan from barley, so I'm actually quite familiar with the chemical breakdown of what is working in your process. So when you made the hockey pucks,
Yeah,
that's because, or I'll call it hockey pucks. I'm from Canada, so of course I'm gonna call it hockey pucks. When you made something very, very hard, it's because that's beta glucan, which is the gluey stuff that you get from oats when you make oatmeal.
Mhm.
It's the same chemical components. It happens by adding it to water. You simply make that rock concept, which is why if you leave your oatmeal pot and not do it, that is the gluey stuff that actually comes out. It tends to be a white substance. You'll see it as a white substance from that perspective. And then there's an internal amount of what we call alpha amylase, which is which naturally occurs in your saliva when you eat bread. It's, when you chew it for a very long time, it starts to become sweet. Is because it's breaking down breaking the starch into sugar, which is why when you caramelize and you bake stuff, you're going to get that umami flavor, because you've converted the starch into sugars, and then the sugars into what they call the Maillard reaction, which give you the caramelization, which is why you're going to get a darker color when you do those types of things. So it's all about the components, about what's in barley, surprisingly, of which explains why you had your experiments work out the way they worked out, because the gluey stuff is going to happen because you didn't cook the starch, and all you did was extract the beta glucan, which makes the glue. And when you convert it and activate the amylase, which happens about 85 degrees Celsius, about 75 degrees Celsius, it'll start activating. You can end up, or 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you can get that activation and make that caramelization. So that's my geeky part about that, but that explains all of the things that you've done on why it works, right?
Fantastic. I love it. So yeah, and that also explains, I guess, the like beer making process with barley, and how you malt it first to get that caramelization, and you can get a like darker caramelization or a lighter caramelization depending. So from these experiments, I liked the flavor better from the cooked barley version. So I think I'm probably going to like lean a little bit more in that direction, just because I really enjoyed the flavor a bit more. But period wise, which one did they use? A lot of them, like, they don't specify in the like a lot of these early recipes don't specify to cook the barley at all. It seems to just be like make a flour and turn it into cakes. But then there's some of the recipes where you are starting from or adding later some like a cooked bread to it. So one of the recipes after doing this whole process with the like barley cake, you then like got freshly baked bread and added it in. So like some versions you're having like kind of a partial, maybe like partial uncooked and partially cooked. So that might be a good, like a fun experiment to do and see if you can then get like some of the flavor from doing like a cooked barley, but then also some of the thickening agency from having some of the uncooked barley. Although the concrete was a real pain in the butt to deal with. So the cons had some other, they had like another set of instructions for how to make the kind of initial starter. So that's the next thing also, is to like look through those instructions, very detailed, to see how that might differ, and to try that one as well, because I don't 100% remember if you're like really starting from the individual cakes versus just like making a giant vat, and starting that in the sun. So
And then just wait till you get the 13 recipes from the Fidalat al-Khiwan.
yes, exactly.
Some are quick. Some of them have the second and third extractions specified. Some have spices, some don't.
Yeah, I really want to try I want to try at least one without spices, because also kind of selfishly and modernly, I have friends who are gluten intolerant and can't have soy sauce. And there's, you can't have like soy sauce and so need to do like something like tamari or something, which is just the soybeans. But then I have other friends who can't do soy. And so then they're really out of luck when they're like trying to just make things, or I'm cooking for them and needing to use soy sauce. So I kind of want to try making an unflavored barley one as like a mundane substitute for soy sauce. But then also like the mint one, there's a mint flavored Murri from Caid. Like that sounds fascinating. I want to try it. So yeah.
So when I've tasted other people's Murri, I've had it at Penzik by, I forget, 2 or 3 other people. And it's always been salty. And some of them have been a little bit sour or tangy. Did yours have any of that quality?
I did not get a sour or tanginess from mine. I'm kind of wondering if part of it was the kind of fermentation or the kinds of stuff that was fermenting, if that would like contribute towards the sourness. Kind of similar to how certain like beers and things can get like sour and vaguely effervescent. Like I didn't have a lot of effervescence in mine, but that's another thing that I would imagine might happen from certain redactions.
Yeah, this one woman brought, I forget, like a dozen different experiments she had done, including some failures.
Yeah.
And then we all insisted she pass the failures around, and we tasted it, and ew, real failure.
Yeah, it's my, like I had started with my failure of the rainbow multicolored molds. I had started it, and my husband like took one look and one whiff and was like, no, you have to stop. This is not okay. You are not serving this to anybody. Like, you are correct. I am not serving this to anybody. I'm going to put this away now and we'll just move forward with the safe one.
Yeah, that's the one problem with these virtual meetings is we can't taste or smell.
I know.
Maybe that technology will come about eventually. Who knows? Like Urta team, I had the experience of tasting a few varieties of Murri at Penzik. One of the earlier ones I remember tasting, one of the things I remember about the conversation with the person who had made it was that he said, you need to have tolerant neighbors while you're making this stuff. So I don't recall, I recall you mentioning this thing really reeked when I opened it, but not the whole house smelled of this type of
No, the failure case I didn't leave for that long. Like that one really did smell, and it smelled the whole backyard, and that's one of the reasons why we didn't leave it back very long. Because every time I walked out, I was like, yeah, that's not good. That is something is happening that is not good, and I don't want my entire backyard smelling of this, because this is clearly not in the right direction. But the stuff that was doing what it was supposed to do, and it smelled like it was fragrant, but it wasn't fragrant in a bad way. It was just like, it smelled like fennel and spices and yeast. It smelled good. Like it smelled tasty.
One friend of mine who decided that he was going to make garum from scratch. Actually made three different
Ooh.
varieties of garum from 3 different kinds of fish. He was describing to me how he did it. He basically had an incubator that because the temperatures involved need to be stable over a long period of time in order to, you need a Roman summer in order to make the stuff. And being in northern New Jersey, that didn't really work too well for him. So he basically had what I called a calidator as opposed to a refrigerator. Just kept things at about 120 degrees for months. So that might be a strategy. I mean, I don't know how stable your temperatures are that you're playing around with.
So, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I've only been doing this in the summer, and why these experiments have been over multiple years, because I've basically waited until the hot months of the summer in order to do it. Because like now I'm out in Simi Valley, and it absolutely is like 90 to 100 degrees in the summer for like a goodly portion of the time. Which honestly may have also contributed to the like really deep flavor that I got in 2021, because the area that I was in 2020, it was hot, but I don't know that it was as consistently hot. Like LA, different parts of LA, you have a little bit more variation in the temperature from like 70 to 100, as opposed to like 90 to 100 degrees outside. So yeah, that's a good point, that would also play a role.
Yeah, it's one of those things you sort of have to remember that I mean, some of my wife's experiences with experiments with baking, she found that she had to use cellar temperatures, northeast cellar temperatures, which meant they had, around 55, 60 degrees or so.
So
otherwise it wouldn't work.
So if you're looking for a warm, moist temperature control concept, believe it or not, check out the cannabis boxes that you can buy. They're really good for temperature and humidity control. That could give you that sort of standardized temperature that you could probably have for a particular location. You could set it and have some fun in controlling that, and actually being able to do it year round whenever you want.
I've never tried making it, because I live in the San Francisco Bay Area on the east side of the bay, and our typical summer temperature here is 68 degrees, and we have a limited number of days when it's over 70, and not always days in a row. So I've never tried anything that needs consistent heat.
But a way to do it is that in order to grow cannabis, and if you're in California, it's not like you can't
legal.
get those things, right? So Amazon has them. Like you're only, you don't need a big, huge facility. You're not making thousands, 7 plants of cannabis, but I mean, it's an idea, I know someone was going to do that for her faience. So like, I mean, just to have some sort of advantage of, humidity and temperature control that would give you similar environments, just something to think of.
Again, that's more or less what my garum making friend was doing.
Yeah.
I want to thank you very much. I'm teaching a class at noon, and I need to take a potty break before I start. So I'm going to have to bail right now, but this was very enjoyable. I just love this stuff. Thank you so much for presenting it.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
And thank you for some of us geeky science people being able to give you a little bit of feedback on exactly what happens It's just that I spent 7 years, 5 years of extracting weird stuff out of oat and barley. So happen to know the process a little bit more on why your stuff works. So that's why you got glue. That's why you got really hard stuff. So that,
I really appreciate that. Yeah, because I had no idea. I was just like, whoa, this is such a pain in the butt to deal with.
I had an experience with curing olives where the olives turned to mush, and somebody told me, why don't you throw in some grape leaves and stems? I did that, and the olives came out just right. Needed more tannin.
Yeah,
needed more tannin. Yeah.
I have an olive experiment that I'm waiting on to like see how it's going to turn out, but it was like doing that ash curing.
I've done that.
Yeah.
We should talk at some point.
We should. But
I found that very interesting when you said that with the ash, when you wrapped it up in the ash, it was, the mold didn't occur because I thought
not at all. Yeah, it was as though I had put it in. Yeah, it was as though I had put it in the day before. It had been 40 days in the ash, and I took it out and opened up the leaves and everything, and it was exactly the same consistency as when I had put it in the ash. It was crazy.
Well, thank you very much for teaching, and I love your experiments. That's awesome. Keep going. I am a mold allergy person bad enough that it will kill me. So it's not something that I would like to play with. I'm going to more likely do the non-fermented one because that's where my brain is going to go. But very, very, very well done. Thank you for teaching. So
thank you so much.
So much.